Senator McCain, thank you very much for taking time to speak to Australian viewers.
Thank you.
Now, you've just come straight from question time. You don't have anything like that in American politics, but you must sometimes yearn for an opportunity to just hurl some insults across the chamber at your opponents.
Quite often. And I think it's a great thing to do. I've visited the British Parliament and seen it there, and I think it's important. And I wish, frankly, that we had something like that. Although, we do have congressional hearings and call various cabinet members up before our committees, but not the President of the United States.
Down to the issues. Australia's announced today that it'll send another 30 troops to Afghanistan, and Australia's been committing troops to US-led missions since 9/11 to help in the fight against terrorism. We were told that it would make the world safer, and yet the events in Manchester last week have shown us yet again that the world remains less safe from terrorism than ever.
I think that's true, and I think one of the reasons is that we have not pursued a strategy for victory. The Obama administration strategy was don't lose, and the fact is that right now the Afghan National Army, known as the ANA, is suffering unsustainable losses, and we withdrew troops at a time when it was going to be harmful to do so. In other words, the President of the United States announced a buildup at a speech at West Point, but at the same time, he announced a withdrawal. You've got to have a strategy for victory. I believe that this national security team that is around the President now, General McMaster and General Kelly and General Mattis, I think they are developing a strategy, and that strategy means victory. But I'd also hasten to add, we could talk this whole program about it, but the big problem of the Haqqani network having sanctuary in Pakistan, a country with nuclear weapons in its inventory, is a huge issue, because as long as the enemy has sanctuary, then it makes it very difficult to defeat him.
Also, you and I can talk strategy for an hour, but the reality is, as you know better than anyone, there are young men and women who are at the pointy end of that strategy, putting their lives on the line. And Australia, as an ally, has trusted the US that it's been the right strategy. And as I said before, the world is less safe.
All I can say to my Australian friends, I thank them for their service. I thank them for their sacrifice. They've done enormous things for more than 100 years with us. But I must say that I said that the strategy was wrong. I said that we can't win if you give the enemy sanctuary, if you're going to announce that you're withdrawing. And frankly, I'm sorry I was right, but I predicted exactly what was going to happen. Now, I believe we have military leaders like General Mattis and General McMaster that have been bred in this conflict, both Afghanistan and Iraq, for the last 15 years. They know how to win.
But you also have a president at the top of the tree that many people, including here in Australia, look at and feel very, very nervous about.
I am nervous from time to time. I do believe that the president has great confidence in this national security team. I do believe that most of the time that he accepts their advice and counsel. Can I tell you that he does all the time? No. And yes, does it bother me? Yes, it bothers me.
There's also the issue that he said he had confidence in the FBI director, and then the next minute the FBI director's gone. So this team that you have confidence in, how do we know that they're going to even be there?
I am sure that the president has confidence in these military leaders. I really do. The whole FBI thing, again, we only have a short period of time, but I don't think there's any doubt that this FBI issue and the whole issue of the Russians and all, it's a scandal of significant proportions, and it's going to be with us for quite a while. I hope we can separate that issue and all of its ramifications from the need for us to win in Mosul, win in Afghanistan, win in Raqqa, and beat back this threat to our nation's national security, which we just saw a manifestation of the problem in Manchester, England.
I'll come to some of those other big world issues a little later, but I wanted to stick for now with recent events. President Trump's just wound up 3 days of meetings in Europe, and after he left, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel has said that the US is no longer the reliable partner that her country or Europe have been able to rely on in the past, and that Europe needs to go it alone. Is that not a logical conclusion for her to draw, given President Trump's behaviour and character and public statements?
I have taken the practice of not reacting to what the president says, but what the president does. He has repeated now, I'm happy to say, a commitment to NATO. I wish when he argued for an increase in European contributions to NATO that he had also pointed out that we are grateful for Article 5 of the NATO conventions, which argue that an attack on one is attack on all. When we were attacked in the United States of America in 9/11, our allies, invoking Article 5, came to our assistance and fought and expended their most precious national assets, their young people's blood, in defense and as a reaction to an attack on the United States of America. I agree with the president that our NATO allies should spend more. But I also think that it's important to always mention how important it is that these young people from our allies are literally fighting and shedding their blood as a result of an attack on the United States of America.
It's perhaps also not just an issue that the Europeans feel a lack of gratitude perhaps or commitment, but they see the US perhaps on policy areas going in a different direction to the way they're tracking. So, for example, the Paris Accord, where all the other European nations want the US to stick to that, and President Trump wouldn't give that commitment. They see President Trump espousing a sort of nationalistic approach rather than a multilateral approach. So there are perhaps several things that are causing the Europeans to feel concerned about relying on the US.
I think that the Europeans are legitimately concerned. I'd also point out that Barack Obama made that agreement without an agreement from the Congress of the United States, which then allows this president to revoke it. And so Barack Obama unilaterally made this agreement. That's not the way American government's supposed to function. We have 3 co-equal branches of government. So Barack Obama made a major commitment without consultation with the Congress of the United States. So in one respect, he made that bed, and it has to lie in it. I think the second point is that when I look at the world in 2009, when Barack Obama became president of the United States, and I look at the world today, it's dramatically changed. And what's one of the major reasons for it? Leading from behind. When America abandons its leadership, then bad things happen, and that vacuum is filled by evil influences. There's now 6 million refugees in the world. There's now 420,000 some who have been killed by Russian aircraft and Bashar Assad and the Iranians and the Revolutionary Guard. These are all a result of a failure of American leadership. So I appreciate the Europeans' viewpoint and their repudiation of Donald Trump. But my friends, why don't they say, maybe we shouldn't have given Barack Obama the Nobel Peace Prize before he was ever even elected?
You point out that America needs to lead from in front, but the flip side of that is that the world has to want and respect American leadership. It isn't the problem for you at the moment that people are reluctant to embrace American leadership under President Trump.
I would like to repeat again, I would like for people to look and see what the president does rather than what he says. The United States of America is supposed to lead. We watch the Iranians take American sailors and put them on their knees at gunpoint with their hands clasped behind their necks, and we did nothing. We had a chemical weapons attack where they crossed in what the president had said was a red line. What do you think message that sent throughout the Middle East? You know one of the reasons why President Trump was so warmly received by all of these Middle Eastern countries? Because at least they see some positive leadership. When Barack Obama said that they had crossed the red line with the use of chemical weapons and then didn't do anything about it, America lost credibility. I believe that if you are looking at the standard of what actually happens versus what is said, then I'll be glad to compare Donald Trump to Barack Obama, including the latest. When chemical weapons were used and we saw these dead children, at least we launched cruise missile strikes in retaliation. So, again, I think we've got a strong national security team. I have disagreed with the president on many times and very vocally. But to somehow our European friends think that things were fine over the past 8 years, then they have a very different view of history than I do.
Let's talk about some of the other issues of concern around the world. How much of a threat to global security do you consider the Russian President Vladimir Putin?
I think he is the premier and most important threat, more so than ISIS. I think ISIS can do terrible things, and I worry a lot about what is happening with the Muslim faith, and I worry about a whole lot of things about it. But it's the Russians who tried to destroy the very fundamental of democracy, and that is to change the outcome of an American election. Now, I have seen no evidence they succeeded, but they tried, and they are still trying. They are still trying to change elections. They just tried to affect the outcome of the French election. So I view Vladimir Putin, who has dismembered Ukraine, a sovereign nation, who is putting pressure on the Baltics. I view the Russians as the far greatest challenges that we have.
But what can be done in terms of trying to address the way that Russians, I guess, are attempting to undermine democracy?
Well, first of all, we have to understand cyber and get a policy, which was, by the way, not there for the last 8 years, as to how to respond to cyber attacks. We have to understand how serious that challenge is and measures we have to take to counter. First, we need a policy. The second thing, sanctions. We have done nothing in response to the election last November to respond to Vladimir Putin's attempt to change the outcome of our elections. So, way to go, Vladimir. We haven't responded at all to it. So we need to have increased sanctions, and hopefully when we come back from our recess, the Senate will move forward with sanctions on Russia and enact other penalties for Russian behavior.
One of the senior advisors in the Trump administration, Jared Kushner, who's also the president's son-in-law, is under a lot of scrutiny at the moment for an alleged attempt to establish some back-channel communications between the Trump team and the Kremlin. Mm-hmm. What's your view of that?
My view of it is I don't like it. I just don't. I know that some administration officials are saying, well, that's standard procedure. I don't think it's standard procedure prior to the inauguration of a president of the United States by someone who is not in an appointed position. And I think that Mr. Comey, we now know, took action that he did in regards to then candidate Clinton because of some false news that was being put out by the Russians. I mean, this becomes more and more and more bizarre. In fact, you can't make it up.
So we know the Justice Department's appointed an independent counsellor to take a look at this, the former FBI Director Bob Mueller. What do you think are the unanswered questions? What do you think we still need to know about this Russia situation?
We need to know two things. One, as far as Mr. Mueller is concerned, whether there was criminal activity in violation of law. That's the job of this special prosecutor. Then we have to have congressional investigations to find out what the Russians did and how they did it and how we respond to the cyber attacks that continue, and basically starting with their attempt to affect the outcome of the last election of 2016. So I think there is dual responsibilities here. And by the way, Mr. Mueller is one of the most respected people in Washington.
How about China? Do you see China as a potential friend ever for the United States and its allies, or does it remain a foe?
I worry a great deal about China. I do not predict confrontation with China. I think it would be of the utmost seriousness. But I do believe in freedom of navigation. I believe that it is clearly illegal, the filling in these islands. I believe that they are asserting themselves economically, which is their right to do. But at the same time, this is still a country that is governed by a communist party and a one strongman leader. That is in contradiction to the democratic principles that govern both Australia and the United States of America. And so I think that China must understand that we will adhere to certain principles which we have for over 200 years, and that is freedom of navigation. And I hope that China will make some progress, especially on the human rights front.
You mentioned China's economic assertiveness. They're developing at the moment what's being called the New Silk Road, which is a trade route through West Asia and Eastern Europe. Is that an attempt by China, do you think, to use its economic clout to wield greater political influence, particularly at a time perhaps when friends and allies of the United States are a little worried about President Trump?
I think the Chinese are attempting to assume what they believe is their rightful role. They've believed it for centuries, and that is a dominant power in the Asia-Pacific region. And I think they're using their economic clout to great effect. And at the same time, I see in the future an alliance between the United States and India, Japan, Korea, where we are a counterweight to their influence, where we will, as Australia has done so well in helping these small island nations make progress towards democracy. There's many things that we can do. And the fundamentals that we stand for will always prevail over those that are counter to that, because it's human nature. It's our fundamental beliefs. It's our principles. Whether the Chinese have become more powerful or not, our way of life is still far more respected by people in the region and around the world than theirs. So ultimately, we will prevail. We just have to be steadfast.
You mentioned Korea before. North Korea has fired another ballistic missile, which has landed in Japan's economic zone. Despite the global community attempting to tackle North Korea, it keeps doing this. What's the next step there?
The key to it is China. China can restrain North Korean behavior. I don't think that it's acceptable for the United States of America to have an intercontinental ballistic missile or a missile aimed at Australia with a nuclear weapon on it and depend on our ability to counter it with an anti-missile capability. So this could be a very serious crisis along the lines of the Cuban Missile Crisis, unless we do everything we can to restrain North Korean behavior. What's the best and easiest way? Obviously the Chinese, because the Chinese control basically the North Korean economy. So we have to explain to the Chinese how this is a vital issue, and we need their help and cooperation. The Chinese say that they're worried about a united Korea. There's nothing to worry about with a united Korea. In fact, I think over time they would profit by it by trade. So this is an impending crisis, and it requires all of us working together to diffuse this crisis